Now with a character like Omega Ridley, there's a lot of interesting things to talk about behind the scenes, but with how vague and how scarce his actual in-game lore was, I felt like if I talked about some of the concepts like the fact that his model got swapped or that this Japanese translation implies that he's a completely different Ridley, I felt like that would like overshadowed and complicated the actual in-canon lore of the character's story. But I still kind of wanted an excuse to talk about this, so I thought it'd be pretty cool to make this its own separate video. If you want to know more about Omega Ridley's lore and not get confused about the background stuff, you got the video there. But if you're more interested in the behind the scenes stuff about the character, we got this video. But keep in mind, everything that, you know, we say in this video, it can't be considered as canon or whatever, because it's not canon, it's all behind the scenes. There's a reason why I didn't want to cover this stuff in the actual lore video, because I just felt like it would just overshadowed everything that we talked about. Maybe if Nintendo wasn't so vague about like Omega Ridley's story or whatever, it wouldn't be an issue, but it's whatever. Of course, if you like Metroid content, please subscribe to the channel, join the membership for early content, badges, and cool emotes, and check me out when I live stream on this channel. Without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is something a lot of people didn't really realize. I didn't even realize it myself, and I made a video talking about Meta Ridley himself. But it's the fact that the Meta Ridley and Omega Ridley models were swapped. It was confirmed through beta footage of like the Omega Ridley fight, but instead of the Omega Ridley model we got at the end of the game, it was actually the model that we saw earlier into the game, the Meta Ridley that we fought on Norian. We don't really get too much of the footage, but it seems like it's just a one-to-one like copy of the model rig. It's just like it's a different model, but same animation. And this is pretty astonishing because like this honestly would have made a lot more sense if it played out this way. The Omega Ridley model looks a lot closer to Meta Ridley from Prime 1, and the Meta Ridley model that we got in Corruption looks a lot more organic and naturally healed as if Phazon rejuvenated him. And if we remember that Proteus Ridley didn't exist for the longest time because Samus Returns wasn't even a concept back then this transition of Ridley as we reach towards Super Metroid just makes a lot more sense. It flows much more better how it's aligned like this. And as far as I can tell, like there's no legit reason for why the models were swapped. Though if I had to guess for like a possible reason, maybe it's because like the Omega Ridley model that we got at the end of the game is much more intimidating as a late game encounter boss with the cybernetics and armor and all that. But despite how much more that makes sense, the end product says something else. And now that we actually do have Proteus Ridley, reverting the swap would just cause even more complications. And plus changing the model doesn't really change anything at the end of the day, like the story's still exactly the same. So it's no real biggie honestly. Though with that fact alone, you can kind of see why I didn't really want to bring that up when it came to explaining Omega Ridley's lore. Again, with how vague and scarce it is, adding something like a model swap that just makes more sense visually just would have made things more confusing. But if you want something really confusing, check this out. So apparently the Japanese version of the Meta Ridley scan actually implies that this isn't even the same Ridley from Prime 1. Let me see if I can get the actual quote. I should actually have had the quote ready when I was recording. Oh my god, Ed, come on. Artificial mutant form, another Ridley metaform separate from Talon 4, as well as another line that says, a separate Ridley metaform from the Talon 4 unit created by the Pirates Genetic Engineering and Cyborg Technology. And on the surface, this scan can actually explain a lot of weird things about Omega Ridley. For starters, if this was a whole different Ridley, his initial death and explosion at the end of Corruption can be written off as not really important because this was never Ridley in the first place. It was just someone else that looked like Ridley. Meaning we don't really have to go, you know, jumping through hoops to explain how he disappeared in a flurry of smoke and all that. On top of that, if this is true that there's other versions of Ridley out there, maybe this is how Ridley's constantly reappearing in each game, because in reality, maybe he is a different dragon in every game and all that. But that's if the translation's accurate, and that's where my issue kind of comes in though, because like the initial scan kind of came through a translated post from someone named Smoke Chill on a forum and all that, and as much as I like to, you know, like trust like online translations and all that, running through the actual translation through multiple different translators like Google Translate, Bing, and even asked ChatGPT itself to like translate it a couple times, but I really couldn't get the exact wording like how he presented it being. They never said anything along the lines of another Ridley. If anything, they referred to him as like an individual from Talon 4. But the issue is, I don't really know how to fully interpret a Japanese exclusive scan. I know for a fact that it's super easy to lose context through translation, especially with languages with different systems of writing. With terms like a metaform revived by the space pirates separately from the individual of Talon 4, you can make an argument that this is talking about how Ridley underwent a separate transformation or process different from the process he undertook on Talon 4. so he's considered a different person from the encounter on Talon 4. We've seen wording like this before. In Metroid Prime 1, Meta Ridley was described as being reborn as a new being despite him not really dying at all. But maybe this is just me coping and I'm just kind of just blatantly just ignoring the fact that it says it's a different life form. It's whatever though. It doesn't really matter. As mentioned with the Proteus Ridley video, the inclusion of the character of Proteus Ridley was meant to kind of acknowledge the events of the Prime games. So if originally this was supposed to be a different Ridley during the events of Corruption, now with Proteus Ridley in the mix, it no longer makes sense for it to be a different character now. Though the real copers are the ones who deny that the Prime games and 2D games are connected. Zing! But also this leads into a whole different argument of whether the Japanese or the American versions of like the translations take precedent over the other, but that's a separate video for another time, honestly. And finally, one last thing I kind of wanted to bring up was some of the concept art for Omega Ridley. Honestly, looking at the boss concept art is always cool, but Omega Ridley has always been super interesting to me because I swear, don't a couple of these like face shapes look like Neo Ridley with the more nuzzle looking mouth instead of like the narrow looking beak it has? And with the context of, you know, Omega Ridley being energized and infused with Phazon and all that sort of stuff, I wonder if there was like a scrap plot point of like basically Ridley being like a revived corpse powered by Phazon, similar to how Neo Ridley was basically a revived corpse brought to life by X-Parasites. With how similar the X-Parasites and Phazon is in general, it makes sense for the mutation to kind of like take a similar form and all that, and I think it'd be pretty dope, honestly. I mean, come on, like a 3D rendition of like Neo Ridley, imagine the scream on that thing. Ah, beautiful. And the fact that it even has like a pyramid head looking like skull, it really makes you wonder like what were they thinking with this? Was there some sort of weird plot point of like Ridley being like an undead zombie of some sort? Which then kind of loops me around to the whole beginning of this point about how like the models of like Meta Ridley and Omega Ridley were swapped and all that. Could it be possible that originally they were planning on making this like concept art a reality, the whole Neo Ridley looking-esque boss, but maybe for whatever reason they couldn't do it? Technical reasons, time constraints, or whatever. And at the end of the day, they needed to improvise like something, and Meta Ridley's model was just as intimidating. So maybe they reused it and swapped it out just to kind of like save some time and all that. But that's just complete utter speculation, cause I'm just kind of like blindly connecting dots here. Like it's just purely speculation. Don't take it too seriously. But it's just interesting with the whole Neo Ridley looking boss design and all that. It really makes me wonder what if. Not that I'm complaining though. Honestly, what we got with the final product is pretty cool on its own. But that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about when it came to Omega Ridley. It's really confusing. Again, swap models, weird Japanese translations we gotta justify in our head and all that. A little extra about how it possibly could have gone like a Neo Ridley-esque boss and all that. All goes to show you how interesting and complex this boss really was. But of course, I wanna know what you guys think though. Like, did you enjoy this style of video? Are there other bosses in the series you'd like to see me like deep dive in the background and all that? There's a little bit I want to talk about more about Thordis and all that. The whole idea of him being like a Magmor boss. So maybe it's something I'd like to get back to and all that. Although, like, if for those who stick around for this far in a video, if you have like a cool video idea or something like that, I'd like to hear it, you know, give you a shout out in the post if you think of something cool. I'll say give something like behind the concept or something, but I don't know. I don't want it to be like too, I don't know, it's ideas, I don't know. Anyways, if you like Metroid content, please feel free to click on the video above. It's a video where I talk about Omega Ridley's actual lore, talking about how he transitioned between Meta Ridley and Proteus Ridley, and overall just give you details about his boss fight. Of course, subscribe if you like Metroid content, join the membership for early access for videos, emotes, and badges, as well as member shoutouts for Rose Maverick Sane, Benjamin E. Mueller, Arrowman Allen, Vic, ZDS Pro, Metroid729, Monkey D. Ben, Zach Zeno, Rat God, Resident Evil Player, and Citrus Punk. Soon I might have to have like a little like Star Wars-esque like title crawl of like all the names soon or something like that, but honestly I wouldn't mind eventually saying like 50 names at one go. It would be pretty funny. Aside from that though, please check me out when I live stream, whether it's Pokemon or Fall Guys or Halo. And with that being said, I'm the Metroid Trainer. Hope you like, favorite, subscribe, and stick around for next time because I'll be seeing you later.